Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 36 chainsaw. The customer complaint is that the fuel system needs attention because the saw has been sitting around for a while. The customer insists that's all that's wrong with it. That's all he's willing to pay for. Don't bother looking at anything else. I don't have a problem doing it that way if that's what he wants. If it turns out that it needs more than that, that's on him. I certainly won't let something out the door if it's unsafe. But if this thing's got a scored cylinder, it's on him. So I looked in the fuel tank and the fuel looked and smelled all right. Though I don't know if he attempted to put fresh fuel in here and that's when he decided it's been sitting too long. I don't know. We're going to open up the carb and see what's going on. So we're taking the air filter off right now. The air filter doesn't look terrible. These old designs, they're pretty simple to work on. I don't know if I like the design though. A little tight in here. There's two nuts, 10mm size, that hold this air filter base in place. And I always worry about those nuts coming loose and getting into the carburetor and into the engine. Now there's a support plate here on the back of the carburetor. And there's two Phillips head screws that hold that plate down. This is a 7mm nut that runs through that plate and holds the carb in place. Now, you got to be careful with these. Some of them are threaded into plastic and some of them are threaded into a brass insert. Either way, when you put it back together, you don't want to get crazy with them. So, we got our stud out. We got one more to go here. And once we have it out, then we can look at that base plate. And I said there was two Phillips head screws. Now that swivel works pretty good. If you try to get a straight shot on there, you can't do it. The other option would be using an open-end wrench. So there's that screw right there has got the ground wire attached to it. So be mindful of that. There's the plate. Now the carburetor is loose. We just got to pop the fuel line off. And that line does look like it has some age. I can see it dripping there, so I know it's not plugged up or the fuel filter's not plugged up. But we'll go back and address that. Off comes the boot. Give it the boot. And we'll blow a little bit of schmutz off of there. Another older video. This predates the carb stand, so we got to go old school and just work on a napkin. Removing the fuel pump cover, exposing the micro screen, shows that everything was normal on this side. So far, I don't know if he was right or not about the carb needing to be opened up. On this side, we have our metering diaphragm. And we're going to take a razor blade and carefully peel it off of here. It's, I don't know. I mean, it's not stiff. I kind of think that it should have ran like that. And a lot of you are saying, well, why didn't you test run it before you opened it up? Why would I want to argue with the guy? If he wants the carb rebuilt, I'll rebuild the carb. Nothing unsafe about rebuilding the carb. If he said he wanted the chain brake spring removed, I wouldn't do that. So we're just going to put the soft parts in here. Now the problem is I'm not using a factory carb kit. It's an aftermarket kit, and I'm not a big fan of these, but I didn't think I had the right kit based on looking at the carburetor and the model number and looking it up. We do have a metering diaphragm that appears to be correct. So we're going to get this screwed down. You'll notice the parts that are left there, the fuel pump gasket and the fuel pump itself, you can't really see because it's clear. These kits that have the clear pumps, I just haven't had a lot of luck with them. There it is right there. So let's see if it matches up our old pump. I mean, those gaskets aren't even close to being the same. So not only, well, I shouldn't say that the parts are bad, but for sure the parts lookup or the reference to the aftermarket kit doesn't match the model of the carburetor. And that's one of the worst things about aftermarket carb kits, is that they make claims they fit a lot of things that they don't actually fit. You know, if the manufacturer used 2 different carburetors over the years of production of that saw, and the kit fits one of the carbs, it may not fit the carb that you have in your saw. So a lot of times I take the original gaskets and I just match them up to pictures of what belongs in the different saws, and when I find a kit that matches my gaskets, then I just go grab the kit. So here we have an original Zama kit that doesn't necessarily match this saw model, but the gaskets that I need are the right ones. So there's our fuel pump and gasket and pump cover. I'm just going to hold the throttle open a little bit so that that pump cover will lay on there without bumping against the idle stop screw. There we go. And then we'll run the screw in here. And because I'm going to charge them for one of the 2 kits, I might as well put the what I perceive as being the better parts into this carb and then bill them for the better kit. And the other kit will just be a loss, I guess. I try to get them not to order those kits, but some of these carbs, the kits are obsolete, or in some cases, if it's a steel, you can only get the kit, the Zama kit, through a steel dealer. So we have replaced the soft parts of the carburetor. The rest of this is getting trashed. I already had some fuel in that funnel, so unless this comes out looking black, which we only got a glimpse of it, I don't think there's anything wrong with that fuel. I think he dumped fresh fuel on top of whatever was in there, or maybe it was an empty tank, but for whatever reason couldn't get the saw to run. And that's when he brought it in and told me just to replace the carb kit. But it needs fuel lines. We're going to do that as well. And that filter isn't very pretty. That fuel line wasn't either. You know, we never pressure tested it, but There's a good chance that there was a problem with that fuel line. And maybe that's why it didn't run. Yeah, these lines definitely are old. Look at the difference in the two halves of that line, the part that was in the tank and the part that wasn't. So we're going to cut a taper on the end of our new fuel line, push it down through the hole, and then grab it inside the tank and pull it through. Now, in the past, I've had to modify that hole that we pushed the line through. I've made it bigger to accommodate bigger fuel line. I might not have had the right diameter line. The point is, you can change that up. As long as you got a sealed tank, you're not going to be leaking fuel, and your line fits on your filter and your carburetor, it's all good. You don't need a bigger line for a smaller engine. And if you get too carried away with the size of the line, you might have a little bit of a problem pumping the fuel. So right now we're just getting oriented here a little bit. Usually the lines are kind of on the same side as the fittings on the carburetor, but not in this case. The line has to take a ride all the way over the top of the carburetor to the other side. So we're just going to kind of stretch the end of this line so it fits over the fitting of the carburetor. Soften it up a little bit and then push the line on. Looks like a nice fit. Alright. Now remember, there's a gasket and there's an impulse hole. All that stuff has to be in place and lined up. In this case, the gasket kind of stuck and we left it there. Did not replace the gasket. Now this support plate gets put down into the tray first, and there is a tab on the kill switch that we snuck that underneath. It's a grounding tab. And then the kill switch grounding wire is on top as well. Alright, so we got our two carb mounting studs screwed into place. They're not cranked down, so I still have to get the two screws at the bottom of that support plate. And I like to get those installed and started before I crank down the other screws. And these are just going down into plastic, so don't get too carried away. Nice catch. So because they're going into plastic, that's why we see the kill switch screwed to that metal plate and a separate grounding wire screwed to that metal plate, so that the kill switch can ground out the ignition coil when the contacts are closed. Alright, getting these studs screwed down tight. We got our throttle linkage in place. Got our air filter base in place. I'm going to drop a little bit of Loctite on these two screws. I don't know if the nuts can actually find their way in the carb. I think I have found one nut jammed against the butterfly one time of carb. And since then, I've used Loctite on these things. So we're going to put this back together and see if it starts and runs. And if it does, then that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 36 chainsaw that needed a carb refresh. Thanks for watching. Later.